The unexpected meeting. The morning dew still clung to the tall grass as Dahlia Winters knelt in the field, carefully examining the native wildflowers that blanketed the countryside of Oak Ridge Valley. Her worn leather journal balanced on her knee as she sketched the delicate structure of a rare orchid variety she'd been tracking for months. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden glow across the meadow that made the dewdrops shimmer like tiny diamonds on spider webs and leaf tips. Perfect timing, she murmured to herself, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat to shield her notes from the growing brightness. At 32, Dahlia had built her life around these quiet moments in nature, documenting, researching, and protecting the botanical treasures that most people overlooked. Her small botanical research center operated on grants and passion, certainly not profit. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and freshly turned earth as she worked, completely absorbed in her observations. The distant sound of vehicles approaching barely registered until they were close enough to disturb the birds in the nearby trees. Dahlia looked up with a frown, tucking a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear as she watched 3 sleek black SUVs pull up at the edge of the meadow. Not now, she sighed, watching as men in suits emerged from the vehicles. This land wasn't fully protected yet. Her research was meant to prove why it should be, and developers had been circling for months. She stood, brushing soil from her practical khaki pants, and squared her shoulders. A tall figure emerged from the center vehicle, his tailored navy suit incongruously formal against the wild beauty of the meadow. Unlike his companions who remained by the vehicles, he walked directly toward her, navigating the uneven terrain with surprising ease. "Miss Winters," he called as he approached. "Dahlia Winters?" She nodded cautiously, closing her journal and holding it protectively against her chest. "That's me, and you're trespassing on a research site." Instead of being offended, the corner of his mouth quirked up. "Nathaniel Thornton. I believe we had an appointment, though apparently my office scheduled it for the wrong location." He extended his hand. "I was expecting to meet at your research center in town." Dahlia didn't take his hand immediately, studying him instead. Nathaniel Thornton, the name registered now. The billionaire tech innovator whose company, Thornton Innovations, had been buying large parcels of land throughout the region. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, driven, and reportedly ruthless in business. "Your secretary called yesterday," she said finally, reluctantly shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but not overpowering. "I explained that I'd be in the field all morning." Perhaps she didn't relay the message. Evidently not. His eyes, a striking shade of gray that reminded her of storm clouds, scanned the meadow. "I've heard you're the foremost expert on the ecological systems in this valley." "I've been studying them for nearly a decade," she confirmed, still wary of his intentions. Nathaniel nodded, then surprised her by kneeling down to examine the orchid she'd been sketching. "Cypripedium reginae, the showy lady's slipper. Rare find." Dahlia couldn't hide her surprise. "You know your orchids. My grandmother was a botanist. She dragged me through gardens and forests every summer." He stood again, brushing a speck of dirt from his knee with an unconscious elegance. "I'm here because I want to build something that works with this land, not against it. My company is planning an eco-friendly headquarters, and I need someone who truly understands what that means." The morning light caught the angles of his face as he spoke, revealing a sincerity she hadn't expected from someone of his status. For the first time, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of someone who smiled often, despite his serious demeanor now. "Most developers just want a rubber stamp on their environmental impact statements," she said carefully. "I'm not most developers. Would you walk with me? Show me what makes this place special?" He gestured toward the expanse of meadow before them. "I'd value your perspective." Against her better judgment, Dahlia found herself nodding. For the next 2 hours, she guided Nathaniel through the meadow and into the wooded areas beyond, pointing out the interconnected ecosystems, the rare plant species, and the delicate balance that made the area unique. To her surprise, he asked thoughtful questions, took notes on his phone, and seemed genuinely engaged. As they returned toward the waiting vehicles, the sunlight now high and warm above them, Nathaniel stopped and turned to her. "You speak about these plants like they're old friends." "In some ways they are," she admitted. "More reliable than people usually." He laughed then, a genuine sound that transformed his face from merely handsome to something more approachable, almost boyish. "Fair enough. Most people in my world only see dollar signs when they look at land like this." "And what do you see?" she challenged. Nathaniel Quota's gaze swept across the meadow, then returned to meet hers directly. "Potential. Beauty. Something worth preserving while still moving forward." He paused. "Which is why I'd like to offer you a consulting position on this project." Dahlia hesitated, weighing the proposition against her instincts. "I don't typically work with corporate interests." "Consider it working against corporate interests from the inside, then," he suggested with a slight smile. "You'd have veto power on environmental concerns." As she considered his offer, one of his assistants approached, speaking in low tones, about a charity gala that evening in the city. Something about last-minute details requiring his attention. Nathaniel nodded to the assistant before turning back to Dahlia. "Think about it. My office will send over the details." He handed her a business card with his personal number written on the back. "I have a feeling we could create something remarkable together." As she watched him walk away, Dahlia couldn't decide if his final words referred to the building project or something else entirely. Either way, the morning had taken an unexpected turn that left her both intrigued and unsettled, like discovering a new species where you least expected it. The curious proposition. 3 days after their unexpected meeting in the meadow, Dahlia found herself in her modest office at the Oak Ridge Valley Botanical Research Center. The converted farmhouse that served as their headquarters was charming, but practical: worn wooden floors, large windows that let in natural light, and walls lined with botanical illustrations and research papers. Her desk was covered with soil samples, microscope slides, and stacks of field notes waiting to be digitized. "Still haven't called him back, have you?" June Patterson, her colleague and closest friend, leaned against the doorframe, two steaming, mugs of tea in hand. Dahlia glanced at Nathaniel's business card, which she'd propped against her computer monitor. "I'm weighing my options." June snorted, setting a mug on Dahlia's desk. "You're overthinking. Thornton Innovations has the resources to help protect the entire valley, not just the parcels we've managed to secure funding for." She blew on her tea. "Plus, the man himself came to find you in a field at dawn. That's dedication." "Or manipulation," Dahlia countered, though without conviction. She couldn't deny that Nathaniel had seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking questions that showed real understanding rather than performative environmentalism. Her phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Dahlia didn't recognize the number. "Dahlia Winters," she answered professionally. "Miss Winters, this is Eleanor Vance, Mr. Thornton's executive assistant." The woman's voice was crisp and efficient. "Mr. Thornton wondered if you might be available for dinner this evening to discuss the consulting opportunity further." Dahlia caught June's raised eyebrow and turned her chair away. "I'm afraid I have prior commitments this evening." It wasn't entirely untrue. She had planned to catalog her recent findings. "I see." A brief pause. "Perhaps tomorrow, then. Mr. Thornton specifically mentioned that he values your perspective and would like to discuss some preliminary designs before proceeding." Something in the assistant's tone, a note of genuine respect rather than the perfunctory politeness she'd expected, made Dahlia reconsider. Tomorrow might work. Where and when? 7 o'clock at Laurel and Sage in Westbrook. It's about 40 minutes from your location. Dahlia knew the restaurant by reputation, farm-to-table cuisine with a focus on sustainable practices, an appropriate choice. "I'll be there," she found herself saying. After ending the call, she turned to find June, grinning. "Don't start," Dahlia warned. "I didn't say anything," June replied innocently. "But you might want to wear something other than field clothes for once." The next evening, Dahlia arrived at Laurel and Sage precisely at 7, having opted for a simple, emerald dress that brought out the green in her hazel eyes. The restaurant was elegant but understated, housed in a renovated mill with exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood furnishings. Nathaniel was already seated at a corner table, rising as she approached. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but his smile seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "You came," he said, as if he had half expected her to cancel. "I'm curious about your project," she replied, taking the seat a server pulled out for her. "Professional curiosity." His eyes crinkled slightly. "Of course. Nothing else." Over appetizers of locally foraged mushrooms and heirloom tomatoes, they discussed his vision for the headquarters, a carbon-neutral building that would blend with the landscape rather than dominate it. His ideas were innovative, his knowledge impressive. By the time their main courses arrived, Dahlia found herself genuinely engaged in the possibilities. "The eastern parcel has the least ecological impact," she advised, sketching on a napkin. "If you position the building here, you could preserve the wetlands that filter groundwater for the entire valley." Nathaniel nodded, studying her drawing. "We could incorporate living walls on the south facade to provide habitat for native pollinators." "Exactly." She smiled, surprised by his understanding. As they shared a dessert of local berry tart, the conversation shifted to their backgrounds. Nathaniel spoke of growing up with wealth but finding purpose in creating sustainable technology. Dahlia shared how her childhood on a struggling farm had taught her the value of natural systems long before she had scientific terms for them. "Your passion is remarkable," he said finally. "Most consultants I meet care about regulations, not the actual land." "That's why I hesitated to work with you," she admitted. "Too many corporate projects use environmental consultants as window dressing." He leaned forward slightly. "And what's your assessment of me now?" "Still forming," she replied with a small smile, "but trending positive." After dinner, as they stood outside waiting for the valet to bring his car, Nathaniel seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he turned to her. "I have a proposition that's not related to the project," he said, his usual confidence showing a hint of uncertainty. "The Westbrook Museum is hosting their annual Botanical Heritage Gala this Saturday. It's a fundraiser for conservation efforts worldwide." "I know of it," Dahlia nodded. The gala was legendary, attended by environmental philanthropists, corporate donors, and social elites alike. Her small research center couldn't afford the steep price of admission. "I'm on the board of directors," Nathaniel continued, "and I find these events tedious without someone who actually understands what we're supposedly supporting." He met her eyes directly. "Would you consider attending as my guest?" Dahlia blinked in surprise. "You want me to go to the botanical gala with you?" "Yes." His answer was simple, but his expression suggested the question was not. "These are your colleagues, your social circle," she said carefully. "I'm a field researcher who spends more time with plants than people. I don't exactly fit in that world." "That's precisely why I'm asking," Nathaniel replied. "The room will be full of people who talk about environmental causes without understanding them. You live that understanding every day." He paused. "Plus, I genuinely enjoy your company." The valet arrived with his car, a sleek electric vehicle that probably cost more than her annual research budget. The contrast between their worlds couldn't have been more apparent. "You don't need to answer now," Nathaniel said, sensing her hesitation, "but I hope you'll consider it." He handed her a small envelope. "Your formal invitation should you decide to accept. My driver would pick you up at 7. As he drove away, Dahlia stood holding the envelope, wondering what it would mean to step into his world, even for one night. The practical side of her recognized the networking potential, access to donors who could support her research center. The more cautious part wondered if she was being used as an authentic prop in a world of environmental performativity. But there was another consideration, one she was reluctant to acknowledge. Something about Nathaniel Thornton intrigued her in a way that went beyond professional interest. His passion for innovation matched her own dedication to preservation. Where those two worldviews might meet fascinated her. Back in her small cottage on the edge of town, Dahlia opened the envelope. The invitation was printed on seed paper that could be planted after use, a thoughtful detail. Along with it was a handwritten note. The gala needs your perspective, and I would welcome your company. Either way, the consulting position remains yours if you want it. No strings attached. And tea? She traced her fingers over the words, appreciating the lack of pressure despite the clear invitation. It was a curious proposition indeed, one that could open doors for her research or complicate her straightforward life immeasurably. Her phone chimed with a message from June. Did billionaire boy ask you to the fancy plant party yet? The whole research team is betting he will. Dahlia smiled despite herself and looked at the elegant invitation once more. Perhaps it was time to step out of the field and into a different kind of jungle just for one night. Preparing for starlight. You said yes to what? June nearly spilled her coffee across the lab table where they were cataloging seedling samples. The morning sunlight streamed through the greenhouse windows, creating prisms in the water droplets on the leaves around them. The Botanical Heritage Gala, Dahlia repeated, carefully labeling a specimen without looking up. It's a professional opportunity. The conservation director from the Wilmot Foundation will be there, and they fund research projects exactly like ours. June leaned back in her chair, studying her friend with a knowing smile. And the fact that you'll be on the arm of the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties has nothing to do with it. He's a potential client who happens to sit on the museum board, Dahlia countered, though a slight flush crept up her neck. This is networking, nothing more. June's expression remained skeptical. So what are you wearing to this networking event where tickets cost more than my monthly rent? The question landed like a stone in Dahlia's stomach. In her focus on the professional advantages, she'd overlooked the practical realities of attending a high society function. Her wardrobe consisted primarily of field clothes, teaching attire, and the one simple dress she'd worn to dinner with Nathaniel. I haven't decided, she admitted. June's face softened. Honey, these galas are where the ultra-wealthy show off. Everyone will be draped in designer labels and family heirlooms. Maybe this was a mistake, Dahlia murmured, suddenly feeling out of her depth. Don't you dare back out. June grabbed her phone. My cousin Farah works at that vintage boutique in Westbrook. Let me call her. Before Dahlia could protest, June was already dialing, speaking rapidly into the phone about an emergency fashion situation and billionaire date rescue. Despite Dahlia's repeated corrections that it wasn't a date, June arranged for them to visit the boutique that afternoon. Bellflower Vintage occupied a charming storefront in Westbrook's Arts District. Inside, racks of carefully preserved clothing from various eras lined the walls, each piece unique with its own history. Farah, a stylish woman with a shock of purple hair, greeted them warmly. June explained everything, she said, leading Dahlia toward the back of the store. The Botanical Gala is old money meets new tech, with a veneer of environmental consciousness. You need something that says you belong in their world while remaining true to who you are. For the next hour, Dahlia tried on an array of evening gowns, each beautiful, but none feeling quite right. Too flashy, too conservative, too reminiscent of costumes rather than something she would choose. This isn't working, Dahlia sighed, stepping out of a beaded gown that made her feel like she was playing dress dash up. Farah tapped her chin thoughtfully, then disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she carried a garment bag with reverent care. I wasn't going to put this on the floor until next week. It just came in from an estate sale. 1960s Norman Hartnell, the designer who created dresses for the British royal family. She unzipped the bag to reveal a gown in a shade of deep forest green that immediately reminded Dahlia of the ancient pines in her research preserve. The silk material caught the light like leaves in sunlight, with delicate embroidery depicting vines and small flowers climbing from the hem upward. It's botanical, Dahlia breathed, touching the fabric with gentle fingers. Try it on, Farah urged. When Dahlia emerged from the dressing room, both June and Farah fell silent. The gown fit, as if it had been made for her, the color bringing out both the green and gold flecks in her eyes. The cut was elegant but not overstated, with a modest neckline and cap sleeves that revealed just enough of her shoulders to be sophisticated without being revealing. "Well?" Dahlia asked nervously. "You look like a woodland goddess," June said simply. "Like you stepped out of one of your research sites and decided to grace mere mortals with your presence." Farah circled her, making small adjustments. "The best part is that it needs minimal alterations. We can have it ready by tomorrow." Dahlia turned to check the price tag and nearly choked. "This is more than my rent." "Consider it an investment in your career," June argued. "Besides, didn't you just receive that grant money for the wetland preservation project?" After much deliberation, Dahlia agreed to purchase the dress, consoling herself with the knowledge that its timeless quality meant she could wear it for years to come. Assuming she ever attended another event like this, the next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. June insisted on accompanying Dahlia to have her hair trimmed, arguing that her usual self-cut layers needed professional attention. Farah loaned her a pair of vintage emerald earrings that complemented the dress without overpowering it. Through it all, Dahlia found herself alternating between excitement and anxiety, wondering if she was making a tremendous mistake. On Saturday morning, an unexpected delivery arrived at her cottage, a small wooden box with Thornton Innovations logo embossed on top. Inside, nestled on moss, was a delicate corsage made of native wildflowers, including miniature versions of the rare orchid she had been studying when they first met. A note accompanied it. "These were grown in our sustainable greenhouse. I thought you might appreciate wearing something familiar tomorrow night. Looking forward to seeing you. T." The gesture touched her unexpectedly. He had remembered not just her work, but the specific flowers that had captured her attention that morning in the field. It wasn't an expensive gift of jewelry or perfume, but something that acknowledged who she was and what she valued. As evening approached, Dahlia found herself standing before her mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Her chestnut hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders. The dress moved like water when she walked. The wildflower corsage was secured around her wrist with a ribbon the exact shade of the gown. A text from June lit up her phone. "Photos, or it didn't happen. And details tomorrow. All the details." Before she could reply, the sound of tires on her gravel driveway announced her ride's arrival. Taking a deep breath, Dahlia gathered her borrowed vintage clutch and a light wrap, trying to calm her racing heart. The car waiting outside wasn't the expected town car, but Nathaniel himself, in the electric vehicle she'd seen at the restaurant. He stepped out as she opened her door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Nathaniel wore a classic black tuxedo that fit him perfectly, making him look like he'd stepped from the pages of a magazine. But it was his expression that caught Dahlia off guard, a look of genuine appreciation mixed with something that might have been nervousness. "You look," he began, then seemed to search for adequate words. "Like you belong in a forest cathedral. Perfect." Something in his unpolished compliment, so different from the smooth confidence he usually projected, eased her anxiety. "Thank you for the corsage," she said. It was a thoughtful surprise. "I'm glad you liked it." He opened the passenger door for her. "Ready to make some wealthy donors uncomfortable with actual scientific knowledge?" Dahlia laughed, some of her tension dissolving. "Is that what I'm really there for? To keep them honest?" "Partly," he admitted as he slid into the driver's seat. "But mostly because every time we've spoken I've left wanting to continue our conversation." He glanced at her as they pulled away from her cottage. "You make me think differently about things I thought I understood." As they drove toward the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, Dahlia felt herself balancing on the edge of something new. Behind them lay the familiar comfort of her research and solitary work. Ahead, an evening of unknown social territory. But the real journey, she suspected, had less to do with the gala and more to do with the unexpected connection forming between two people from vastly different worlds. "So," Nathaniel said, breaking into her thoughts, "tell me about your current research. We have 40 minutes until we arrive, And I'd rather hear about endangered orchid propagation than think about making small talk with the museum trustees. Dahlia smiled, settling into the comfortable leather seat. Perhaps the night wouldn't be so daunting after all. Not if she had at least one person there who actually wanted to hear what she had to say. The night of whispers and wonder. The Westbrook Museum of Natural History stood transformed for the Botanical Heritage Gala. Its neoclassical facade was illuminated with subtle green and gold lighting, while the grand entrance had been adorned with elaborate arrangements of sustainably grown exotic flowers. A red carpet stretched from the street to the main doors, flanked by photographers and journalists documenting the arrivals of the city's elite. As Nathaniel's car joined the queue of luxury vehicles, Dahlia's throat tightened. "You didn't mention press coverage," she whispered, smoothing her dress nervously. "Regional society pages mostly," he replied, reaching over to briefly touch her hand. "Just smile and keep walking. They're more interested in the regular attendees than in us." "Regular attendees?" she echoed. "You're on the board of directors." He shrugged with a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I usually skip the red carpet entrance, makes my publicist furious." When their turn came, Nathaniel handed his keys to the valet and came around to open her door. As he offered his arm, Dahlia took a steadying breath and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. The camera flashes intensified immediately. "Mr. Thornton, over here. Who's your date tonight?" "Nathaniel, this way, please." He guided her forward with gentle pressure, nodding politely to the photographers but not stopping for posed pictures. Just as they were about to escape the gauntlet, one persistent reporter stepped directly into their path. "Claudia Mercer, Westbrook Chronicle," the woman said briskly. "Mr. Thornton, is this your new corporate environmentalist? The word is, you've hired a consultant to greenwash your latest development project." Before Nathaniel could respond, Dahlia felt a surge of indignation. "Dr. Dahlia Winters," she corrected, her voice calm but firm. "I'm the lead researcher at the Oak Ridge Valley Botanical Research Center, and I assure you I don't participate in greenwashing anything." The reporter's eyebrows rose slightly. "So you're denying that Thornton Innovations has hired you?" "We're exploring a potential collaboration," Nathaniel interjected smoothly. "Dr. Winters is here tonight as my guest because of her exceptional work in conservation biology, not as a corporate representative." He steered Dahlia away before the reporter could ask another question, leaning close to murmur, "Sorry about that. Claudia's been trying to catch me in some environmental scandal for years." "Is there one to find?" Dahlia asked, only half joking. "Not in my company," he answered seriously. "Though plenty in my industry. That's why your perspective matters so much." They entered the museum's grand hall, which had been transformed into a botanical wonderland. Massive installations of rare plants and flowers created living sculptures throughout the space. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in warm golden light, while a string quartet played classical music from a corner dais. Hundreds of guests in formal attire mingled among the displays, champagne glasses in hand. Dahlia felt the weight of curious gazes as they moved into the room. Nathaniel, seemingly oblivious to the attention, guided her toward a display of endangered orchids from South America. "These are from the same family as your research specimens," he noted, "though considerably more flamboyant." She smiled, grateful for his attempt to put her at ease with familiar subject matter. Evolutionary adaptation to their specific pollinators. The more isolated the habitat, the more specialized the relationship between plant and pollinator. "Rather like people," came a cultured voice from behind them. They turned to find an elegant older woman regarding them with undisguised interest. "Some of us thrive in very specialized environments, while others can adapt to new circumstances." "Professor Montgomery," Nathaniel greeted her with genuine warmth. "May I introduce Dr. Dahlia Winters?" "Dahlia, this is Professor Eleanor Montgomery, curator of the Botanical Collection, and my former undergraduate advisor." "The orchid specialist from Oak Ridge Valley," Professor Montgomery said, extending her hand to Dahlia. "I've read your paper on mycorrhizal relationships in declining orchid populations. Brilliant methodology." Dahlia blinked in surprise. You've read my work? I make it a point to follow emerging researchers in my field, the professor replied, particularly those working in conservation, though I confess I didn't expect to see you here tonight. Dr. Winters is my guest, Nathaniel explained, and possibly a future collaborator on our Sustainable Headquarters project. Professor Montgomery's eyes sparkled with amusement. How fascinating. Nathaniel never brings guests to these functions. She took Dahlia's arm. Come, my dear. You must tell me about your current research while Nathaniel fulfills his obligatory board member duties greeting donors. Before Dahlia could protest, she found herself being led toward a group of distinguished-looking academics gathered near a display of rare botanical texts. Nathaniel gave her an apologetic smile and a subtle thumbs up as Professor Montgomery swept her away. The next hour passed in a blur as the professor introduced her to colleagues from universities and research institutions across the country. To Dahlia's surprise, several recognized her name from publications or conferences, treating her with professional respect rather than as an outsider. Your work on habitat connectivity is exactly what our next grant cycle focuses on, said the director of a major conservation foundation, pressing his card into her hand. Send me your proposal for the Western Expansion Project. We should talk. As Professor Montgomery led her toward yet another influential contact, they passed a group of elegantly dressed women who fell silent, watching them with poorly disguised curiosity. Don't mind them, the professor murmured. The social set is simply processing that Nathaniel Thornton, who typically attends these functions alone and leaves early, brought someone with genuine intellectual substance rather than decorative value. I'm not with him in that sense, Dahlia clarified quickly. This is a professional connection. Professor Montgomery's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. Nathaniel was my most brilliant student. Could have had a distinguished academic career. Instead, he built an empire but retained his intellectual curiosity. He doesn't suffer fools or superficiality, which makes his social circle rather limited. Before Dahlia could respond, Nathaniel appeared at her side with 2 flutes of champagne. I see the professor has been monopolizing you, he said, offering Dahlia a glass. I should have warned you about her tendency to academic kidnapping. I've been introducing your guest to people who can actually advance her research, Professor Montgomery replied with affectionate sharpness, unlike the trustees who only wanted to know where she bought her dress. Nathaniel winced. I've just escaped that very conversation with Mrs. Harrington. Apparently, we're the subject of considerable speculation tonight. Let them speculate, the professor said dismissively. I'm stealing Dr. Winters again after dinner for the rare manuscript viewing. The curator is showing the original Banks's Florilegium prints. As she moved away to greet another colleague, Nathaniel turned to Dahlia. I should apologize for abandoning you, but it seems you've been making more valuable connections than I could have facilitated. It's been surprisingly productive, Dahlia admitted. Professor Montgomery has introduced me to 3 potential funding sources already. A soft chime indicated dinner was about to be served, and Nathaniel guided her toward their assigned table near the center of the room. As they walked, Dahlia became acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. Sideways glances, whispered comments behind jeweled hands, evaluating looks. Everyone's staring, she murmured. Not everyone, he corrected. Just the people who think they matter. Their table was shared with several museum board members and their partners, all of whom regarded Dahlia with polite curiosity. As they took their seats, a sleek woman in a designer gown leaned toward her. So refreshing to see a new face, she said with practiced charm. How do you and Nathaniel know each other? Before Dahlia could formulate a suitably vague response, a man across the table laughed. Obviously, she's his environmental consultant for the new headquarters. Right, Thornton? Smart PR move, bringing the conservation angle to the gala. Dahlia felt her cheeks warm, but Nathaniel's expression remained pleasantly neutral. Dr. Winters is the director of botanical research at Oak Ridge Valley, he said evenly. And while we are discussing a professional collaboration, she's here, Tonight because I enjoy intelligent conversation about subjects that actually matter. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only when the first course arrived. An artistic arrangement of local seasonal vegetables with edible flowers. How appropriate, Dahlia said, genuinely appreciating the presentation. Garden, nasturtiums and violets, both with medicinal properties historically. This simple observation sparked a discussion about culinary botany that carried them through the first course, with Dahlia unconsciously taking the lead in explaining the historical uses of various edible flowers. By the time the main course arrived, even the initially dismissive board members were engaged in the conversation, asking questions about sustainable agriculture and native food systems. Throughout dinner, Dahlia caught Nathaniel watching her with undisguised admiration as she answered questions with increasing confidence. The nervousness she had felt upon arrival had faded, replaced by the same assurance she experienced when, leading field research expeditions, A's dessert was served, a delicate confection garnished with crystallized wildflowers. The museum director rose for a brief speech about the evening's fundraising goals for conservation projects worldwide. Dahlia listened with professional interest until he mentioned a specific initiative to protect a rare orchid habitat in South America. The Cypripedium europaeanum project needs particular support, the director explained, as these orchids face extinction within the decade without intervention. Dahlia frowned slightly, leaning toward Nathaniel. That's incorrect, she whispered. Cypripedium europaeanum is endangered, but it's native to Mexico and Central America, not South America. And the conservation approaches they're describing won't address the actual threats to its habitat. Nathaniel studied her for a moment, then raised his hand, catching the director's attention. Charles, I believe Dr. Winters has some relevant expertise on this particular species. Perhaps she could clarify a few points about the conservation approach. All eyes turned to their table as the director blinked in surprise. Of course, Dr. Winters, we'd welcome your input. For a paralyzed moment, Dahlia felt the weight of hundreds of gazes fixed upon her. Then Nathaniel's hand found hers beneath the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Drawing a deep breath, she rose to her feet. Thank you, she began, her voice initially soft but growing stronger. I'd just like to offer some clarification about Cypripedium europaeanum, which is actually native to highland forests in Mexico and Guatemala, not South America. What followed was a brief but passionate explanation of the orchid's actual habitat, requirements, and the conservation approaches that would truly make a difference. She spoke with the natural authority that came from years of fieldwork and research, forgetting momentarily that she was addressing some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the region. When she finished, there was a brief silence before Professor Montgomery began to applaud, quickly followed by others around the room. The museum director, rather than appearing embarrassed by the correction, looked intrigued. It seems we have an unexpected expert in our midst, he acknowledged with a gracious nod. Dr. Winters, would you consider consulting with our botanical conservation committee on this initiative? We clearly have some recalibration to do. As Dahlia returned to her seat amid continued applause, she caught Nathaniel's expression, a mixture of pride and something deeper, more personal. The rest of the table regarded her with new respect, the earlier condescension replaced by genuine interest. That, Nathaniel murmured as she sat down, was magnificent. It was impulsive, she whispered back, suddenly self-conscious again. I shouldn't have contradicted the director publicly. You corrected misinformation about something that matters, he countered. That's exactly what tonight needed. Someone who cares more about the actual conservation than about the social performance of caring. After dinner, as guests moved through the exhibits and gathered in conversation groups, Dahlia found herself continuously approached by people who had been in the audience. Museum trustees asked for her card, conservation donors sought her opinion on projects, and several academic colleagues invited her to collaborate on research initiatives. Near midnight, as the evening began to wind down, Nathaniel found her deep in conversation with a renowned botanist about habitat restoration techniques. I hate to interrupt, he said, but Professor Montgomery is about to begin the rare manuscript viewing she promised you. As they walked toward the museum's special collections room, Nathaniel gently guided her to a quiet alcove near a spectacular living wall of tropical plants. The sounds of the gala faded slightly, creating a moment of relative privacy. Are you enjoying yourself? He asked, studying her face in the soft lighting. Surprisingly, yes, Dahlia admitted. It's not at all what I expected. What did you expect? Superficial conversations about fashion and social status, being ignored or patronized. She smiled ruefully, being completely out of place. Nathaniel shook his head, his expression serious. You've become the center of genuine interest tonight. Not because you're with me, but because you brought something real into a room that's usually filled with performance and pretense. He hesitated, then continued more quietly. Everyone who typically bores me to tears at these events has been watching you all evening, wondering who this woman is who speaks with such passion about things that actually matter in the world. And what have you been thinking? Dahlia asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Nathaniel's gaze held her steadily. That I've never met anyone like you. That bringing you tonight was the best decision I've made in years. He paused. And that I'm hoping this evening is just the beginning of something, not a one-time experiment in crossing social boundaries. Before she could respond, Professor Montgomery appeared, beckoning them toward the special collections room. Come along, you two. The curator won't wait all night, even for board members and brilliant botanists. As they followed the professor, Nathaniel's hand found the small of Dahlia's back, a gentle touch that felt both protective and possessive. The gesture spoke volumes about intentions not yet fully articulated between them. The night that had begun with whispers of judgment had transformed into one of wonder, not just at the rare botanical treasures surrounding them, but at the unexpected, connections forged across seemingly unbridgeable worlds. And as Dahlia leaned closer to examine a centuries-old illustration of the very orchids she studied, she was acutely aware that the most significant discovery of the evening had nothing to do with plants at all. Worlds collide, hearts unite. Dawn. Light filtered through the windows of Dahlia's cottage as she sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. The gala, the connections she'd made, the way the room had shifted from viewing her as an outsider to seeking her expertise. On the table before her lay a small collection of business cards from potential research collaborators, along with her own handwritten notes about funding opportunities that had materialized over the course of the evening. Professor Montgomery had invited her to guest lecture at Westbrook University, and the museum director had formally requested her consultation on their orchid conservation initiative. Yet none of these professional opportunities occupied her thoughts, as much as the memory of Nathaniel's words in that quiet alcove, and the lingering sensation of his hand at the small of her back as they'd walked together through the museum's hallowed halls. Her phone chimed with a text from June. Well? I'm dying over here. How was it? Dahlia smiled, typing back. Professional success beyond expectations. Made valuable connections. We'll tell you everything tomorrow at work. June's response was immediate. That's not what I'm asking about, and you know it. Before Dahlia could reply, another text arrived, this one from Nathaniel. Morning. Hope you're not regretting last night's botanical corrections. The director's been calling me since 7 a.m. about restructuring their conservation program. With your input. Apparently you've revolutionized their thinking with a 5-minute speech. She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea as she typed back. No regrets. Though still surprised they didn't throw me out for contradicting their keynote. His response came quickly, quite the opposite. You're the talk of the botanical world this morning. The museum hasn't generated this much excited discussion in years. A moment later, another text. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not to discuss the project or the gala, just dinner. Dahlia stared at the message, understanding its significance. This wasn't a business meeting or a social obligation, but a clear step towards something personal. Her finger hovered over the screen before she typed, I'd like that. Setting down her phone, she moved to the cottage's small front porch, watching as the morning sun illuminated the wildflower meadow beyond her garden. The contrast between her world and Nathaniel's had seemed so stark just days ago. Her simple cottage and research center versus his corporate headquarters and social connections. Yet last night had revealed unexpected bridges between those worlds. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes. By day, Dahlia continued her research and began formal consultation on Thornton Innovations' headquarters design, insisting on preserving key habitats while finding creative ways to integrate the building with its natural surroundings. By evening, she and Nathaniel explored their growing connection over dinners, walks through botanical gardens, and long conversations that often continued until midnight. Their worlds gradually intertwined. Nathaniel began appearing at the research center, rolling up his sleeves to help with fieldwork, genuinely interested in understanding the ecosystems his company would neighbor. Dahlia found herself attending select business functions and environmental policy meetings, discovering that her straightforward expertise commanded respect in rooms where corporate and environmental interests collided. 1 month after the gala, Dahlia sat in Professor Montgomery's office at Westbrook University, discussing her guest lecture series on conservation biology. "You've caused quite a stir in our little ecosystem," the professor remarked with a knowing smile. "Both academically and personally." "The lecture series?" Dahlia asked innocently. "Don't be obtuse, my dear, it doesn't suit you." Professor Montgomery leaned forward. "I've known Nathaniel for 15 years. I've never seen him integrate someone into his life the way he has with you. He brought the entire board of directors to your research center last week." Dahlia couldn't help her smile. They seemed genuinely interested in the wetlands restoration project. "They were genuinely interested because he is genuinely invested in your work and in you." The professor's expression grew more serious. "Which brings me to my actual question. The Montgomery Foundation is considering funding an expanded research initiative for Oak Ridge Valley, a rather substantial grant." Dahlia's heart leaped at the possibility. Such funding could transform their small center's capabilities, allowing them to protect significantly more land and conduct more comprehensive research. "That would be extraordinary," she began, but the professor raised a hand to pause her. "I need to know that this isn't about Nathaniel." Her gaze was penetrating. "That your research stands on its own merit regardless of personal connections." Dahlia straightened, feeling both challenged and respected by the question. "My work began long before I met him, and will continue regardless of any personal relationship. I would welcome the Foundation's scrutiny of our research methodology and conservation outcomes on their scientific merit alone." Professor Montgomery nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because your approach to integrated habitat preservation deserves support based on its innovation, not its association with Thornton Innovations." She slid a folder across the desk. "The preliminary grant proposal guidelines. We'll expect your submission by the end of the month." As Dahlia left the university campus, clutching the folder that represented such profound opportunity for her research team, her phone rang with Nathaniel's number. "Perfect timing," she answered. "I've just had the most extraordinary meeting with Professor Montgomery." "The research grant?" he asked immediately. "She mentioned the Foundation was impressed with your wetlands methodology." "You knew about this?" "I'm not on that Foundation's board," he clarified quickly. "Eleanor mentioned it last week, but was very clear that my influence was neither welcome nor necessary. Your work speaks for itself." The simple validation in his words warmed her as she walked toward the parking area where they had arranged to meet. "Where are you?" she asked, looking around the busy lot. "Look up." Dahlia raised her eyes to see Nathaniel leaning against his car just 30 feet away, phone to his ear, watching her with undisguised affection. She ended the call and walked toward him, suddenly conscious of how natural it felt to see him waiting for her, how her steps quickened automatically. "I thought we were meeting at 7, she said as she reached him. Meeting ran shorter than expected. He took the heavy folder from her arms. "Thought I'd surprise you?" "Consider me surprised," she replied with a smile, "and hungry." The professor's questioning was rather intense. Dinner at the lake house? He suggested. The chef made that wild mushroom risotto you liked. Nathaniel's lake house, a modernist structure of glass and sustainable timber overlooking a protected forest reserve, had become their frequent retreat over recent weeks. Unlike his formal city residence used primarily for business entertaining, the lake house was personal space, filled with books, botanical illustrations, and comfortable furniture designed for long conversations. As they drove through the countryside, toward the lake, Dahlia found herself studying Nathaniel's profile. The sharp lines of his jawline had become familiar, as had the way his expression softened when they discussed subjects close to her heart. The initial impression of the unapproachable Tycoon had given way to knowledge of the man beneath. Brilliant, but uncertain in matters of the heart, powerful in business but genuinely committed to creating something sustainable. "You're staring," he noted without taking his eyes from the road. "Observing," she corrected. "It's what researchers do." "And what are your findings?" "Still collecting data," she replied with a small smile. "Preliminary results are promising but require further study." He laughed, reaching across to take her hand. "Fair enough." At the lake house, they ate dinner on the terrace overlooking the water, discussing the museum's revamped conservation program and the progress on the headquarters design. As twilight deepened into evening, Nathaniel grew quieter, seemingly preoccupied with thoughts he wasn't sharing. "Something's on your mind," Dahlia finally observed. "Is there a problem with the project?" "No, the project is proceeding perfectly thanks to your guidance." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "Actually, I've been thinking about us, about how unexpected this connection has been." Dahlia set down her wine glass, suddenly alert to the seriousness in his tone. "Unexpected is certainly accurate. When I invited you to the gala, I thought I was bringing fresh perspective into a stagnant social environment," he continued. "I didn't anticipate how much meeting you would change my own perspective." He rose from his chair and moved to the terrace railing, looking out over the darkened lake. "I've built my career on recognizing potential, in technology, in markets, in innovation, but I missed something fundamental until recently." "Which is?" Dahlia asked, joining him at the railing. "That success means nothing without purpose beyond itself." He turned to face her. "You live your purpose every day, protecting what matters, fighting for balance between progress and preservation. It's not just your work, it's who you are." "And you don't," she challenged gently. "I've created sustainable technologies and profitable innovations," he acknowledged, "but too often separated from the actual impact on the world they're meant to improve." He took her hands in his. "You've shown me what it means to be genuinely connected to that purpose, to have your hands literally in the soil you're trying to save." Dahlia was moved by his words but sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "Nathaniel, what are you really trying to tell me?" He drew a deep breath. "That night at the gala, everyone was watching you because you were different, authentic, in a room full of performance. You stood out not because you didn't belong, but because you brought something real into a space that desperately needed it." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "And I've realized that's what you've done in my life as well. Before you, I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me. My influence, my resources, my connections. You wanted none of that. You challenged me, questioned my assumptions, made me prove that my environmental commitments were genuine." "I was just being myself," Dahlia said softly. "Exactly." Nathaniel's eyes held hers intently. "And in doing so, you've made me more myself. More connected to what actually matters." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved from what appeared to be reclaimed timber. "I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment." Dahlia's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal not a conventional jewelry setting, but a delicate metal sculpture resembling the rare orchid from their first meeting, its center holding a small but remarkable emerald that caught the low lighting of the terrace. "This isn't a traditional ring," he explained. "The artist used recycled platinum, and the emerald comes from a sustainable mine with verified ethical practices." His voice grew softer. I thought it represented us, something beautiful that bridges different worlds while respecting what you value. Are you? Dahlia began, hardly daring to form the question. Asking if you'll continue this journey with me? Yes. Nathaniel's expression was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Not just as a consultant or companion, but as a partner. Someone to build something meaningful with in every sense. She looked from the exquisite orchid sculpture to his face, seeing both nervousness and hope there. We come from such different worlds, she said quietly. Worlds that need each other, he countered. Progress needs preservation to have meaning. Innovation needs connection to have purpose. He paused. I need you, Dahlia. Not to change you or make you fit into my world, but to build something new together. The night air was still around them, the lake a perfect mirror for the stars above. In that moment, Dahlia saw clearly what had been gradually revealing itself over the weeks, that their apparent differences concealed a profound alignment of core values, different approaches to the same essential truths. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady with certainty. Yes, I'll build that with you. As he slipped the unique ring onto her finger, Nathaniel's smile held both joy and relief. The Tycoon and the botanist, he murmured, not exactly a conventional pairing. Conventional is overrated, Dahlia replied, moving into his embrace. Nature thrives on diversity, on unexpected connections that create resilience. She looked up at him. Besides, the most important ecosystem we'll build isn't the headquarters or even the research preserve. No, it's this, she said softly. Us. A partnership that honors both progress and preservation, innovation and tradition. Something sustainable in every sense of the word. Above them, the night sky filled with stars, each one a distant point of light in the vast darkness. Below, the lake reflected those same stars, creating an illusion of infinity stretching in both directions. And between these mirrors of possibility, two people from different worlds stood together at the threshold of something new. A future neither had imagined until their paths unexpectedly crossed in a wildflower meadow at dawn. 6 months later, they were married in that same meadow, surrounded by both wildflowers and well-wishers from their now intertwined worlds. Professor Montgomery officiated the ceremony, speaking eloquently about ecological balance and human connection. June served as Dahlia's maid of honor, while Nathaniel's chief technology officer stood as his best man. The Botanical Heritage Gala that year featured a special exhibition on innovative conservation partnerships, highlighting the work being done by the newly expanded Oak Ridge Valley Research Center, now operating with both the Montgomery Foundation grant and matching corporate sustainability funds from Thornton Innovations. And when the museum director introduced the exhibition's patrons, Dr. Dahlia Winters Thornton and Nathaniel Thornton, the whispers that filled the room were not of judgment, but of admiration for what they had accomplished together, a model of corporate environmental partnership that was changing industry standards across the region. Not bad for a village girl who crashed a high society party, June whispered teasingly as they toured the exhibition. I didn't crash it, Dahlia corrected, glancing across the room to where Nathaniel was deep in conversation with a group of corporate executives about sustainable business practices. He caught her eye and smiled. I was invited. I just didn't expect it to change everything. That night, as the gala concluded and they walked together under the stars, Nathaniel took her hand, the unique orchid ring glinting in the moonlight. Happy? Dahlia nodded, thinking of the research preserve they had established, the sustainable headquarters under construction, and the life they were building together. It turns out some boundaries are worth crossing, she said softly. Some worlds are meant to collide. And some hearts are meant to unite, he finished, drawing her close as the night embraced them. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but a shared purpose that transcended their differences and celebrated their complementary strengths. In the distance, the lights of the city twinkled like earthbound stars, while around them the natural world continued its ancient rhythms of growth and renewal. Between these worlds they had found their place, not fully in either but creating something new at the intersection of both. And in that space between, something beautiful had taken root and flourished, just like the rare wildflowers that had brought them together on that fateful morning when a tycoon had walked into a meadow and found not just a consultant, but his perfect counterpart.